So hello everyone and welcome to this Provar webinar on testing the Lightning Experience. My name's Hetty and I'm Head of Marketing at Provar. On the call today from Provar we also have Geraint Waters and Richard Clark, who's our main presenter today. A little bit of housekeeping before I hand over to Richard. We're expecting the presentation to last about 45 minutes and we'll have some time for questions at the end of that. You're welcome to ask questions during the talk that we can pick up at the end, and you can do that by typing into the questions box. The session's also being recorded, so I'll make sure that a link is sent round later on so that you can watch the presentation again. And finally, I'd like to make a quick plug for our next webinar, which is coming up in March. This is the first of our new series about what's new in Provar, where our product management will be talking a bit about Provar's newest features and sharing a bit about the upcoming roadmap for next quarter. So do sign up if you're interested in that, as it promises to be a really good session. The link on screen is the one that you can follow now if you want to sign up for that, and we'll remind you again at the end as well. So that's it from me, so I'll hand over to Richard.
Thank you, Hetty. So welcome everyone. A quick word about myself, Richard Clark. I've been working at Provar since only November last year, but I've actually been a customer of the product before. So I've used Salesforce for over 10 years now. And in that time, I've been both a system integrator to deliver Salesforce Sales and Service Cloud and App Clouds for our customers, and also as an app provider. So I've delivered and built my own applications on the Salesforce platform too. I've also been a Provar customer on 2 occasions, more recently for a global SATCOM provider, where we actually went through a Lightning migration exercise to reboot the user's experience from a 15-year-old implementation of Salesforce, and we actually succeeded in bringing 2 new business units on board by switching to Lightning, and we increased our user adoption from about 45% to 90%. So I'm a big fan of Lightning. I've seen it actually help improve people's productivity as well. So this one's a little bit tongue-in-cheek for those that have ever seen a Salesforce presentation. So while we might not be listed ourselves on a New York Stock Exchange, I am going to talk about features today that you can't currently do in the current version of Provar. I'm going to call those out as and when I use them as much as possible, but please make any purchasing decisions based on what you experience yourself in terms of any proof of concept or your own use of Provar of what you've seen appropriate to your needs rather than what you see today. So a quick overview of what I'm going to cover today. So we do have some people on the call who are existing Provar customers, and we have other people who are new to Provar. So I'm going to try and balance things accordingly. So apologies for those that are experts. There may be some bits where I'm repeating things you've heard before. And apologies to those who are new to Provar. I'm going to go quite fast, especially through some of the demos today. If you'd like to see more about Provar, please contact us directly and arrange an individual one-to-one session with us to understand how Provar can help you. So I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that are special to the Lightning experience, especially migrating from a classic user interface before. I'm going to do several demos, so don't worry, there's still not too much slideware today. And those demos will cover changing a existing test that's written in Provar in Classic and seeing how that runs when I move to Lightning, recording new tests in Lightning console, a Flexipage, so within Lightning, a Flexipage and what happens when I change that, and also custom components that are written in the Aura framework, how we can test those. And that's very much the new area I was talking about, stuff that I can do, and you'll have to wait a little bit longer, a few more weeks to get your hands on that functionality. I also want to talk about our roadmap for Lightning specifically, working on lots of other initiatives in parallel, lots of work streams, but I'm the work stream lead for the Lightning work stream, and so I'm going to talk about what we plan to do over the next 6 months or so there. And if there's time, I'll also talk about the Lightning migration strategy, so some tips and tricks for you when considering moving over from Classic to Lightning and how you make test automation part of your plans. I'll cut that short so we have time for questions at the end if necessary. So very quickly about Provar. So the problem that Provar fixes is one I think we're all familiar with, otherwise we probably wouldn't be on this call in the first place. Manual testing is costly and time consuming. It's also quite variable in that it's down to the skill of the tester and the skill of the person who writes the test case. The solution to that potentially is to have a coded test automation, and there's lots of tools available to write your test automation in code. Obviously, the issue there is you, as well as having your own development that you want to test, you're also employing developers to write tests on that development as well. And as a result of that, you're increasing your technical debt exponentially as you increase the amount of code you have. The other issue is that generic test tools exist. We know and love them. We all know some of them that might be used across our organizations, but they haven't been able to move fast enough with the pace of change of a tool like Salesforce, and it's 3 releases per year. Some of the challenges we see, either one or all of these, and I've experienced these myself, is around reliability. So if I have written my tests using a custom code framework, my locators, field locators, aren't necessarily reliable. And when I move across different environments, I have to effectively update or parameterize my field locators, which is a problem. Also, in terms of complexity, when it comes to things like Visualforce IDs, Salesforce CPQ shadow DOMs, multiple nested frames within the Service and Sales Cloud consoles, there's difficulty in doing that within a coded test automation. And finally, reusability. So if you have developed your test cases for Classic, then when it comes to Lightning, potentially you have to redo all those test cases completely. So we try and solve all those problems for you as much as possible. Now, obviously, we're talking today about being Lightning ready, about how those test cases can be reused across Classic, Lightning, and mobile, but we're also a Salesforce specialist partner. So we're linked in with the Salesforce product roadmap, we're involved in the community, and we're very much working very closely with Salesforce on their new features as they bring them out and expanding our support for various Salesforce features. We also are primarily a no-code solution, so we very much want people to avoid having to ever write code to do test automation, and that's all clicks and drag and drop interface that we use. And finally, testing's all well and good, but it's not an island on its own. It needs to be part of your whole DevOps strategy. So we make sure that we're working with continuous integration and version control tools, so you can have a complete process to be triggered, so you know your builds are reliable when deliveries are completed by your project development teams to be released into system testing, UAT, or production. We've also been working closely with Salesforce on their Salesforce DX, their new tooling for spinning up these Scratch orgs, and we'll have some exciting news later in the year about further developments in that space. In the meantime, if you're interested in Salesforce DX, we have a good webinar and a how-to guide already on the Provar website. So let's look at some of the functional and technical challenges with Lightning Experience. Before we continue, I just want to set some terminology so we're all speaking on the same terms. When I talk about Classic today, I'm talking about the existing old user interface that's been around 9 or 10 years now, also known as Aloha internally in Salesforce. When I mention Lightning Experience, I'm talking about our new user interface Salesforce has provided, the very slick looking interface, the mobile first one, which is also known as Lightning or LEX, Lightning Experience. Now, the word Lightning has potentially been a little bit overused by Salesforce marketing. So when I say Lightning application, I'm talking about a custom application. And that custom application consists of a number of Flexipages and Lightning component tabs typically. And that's slightly different to a Classic app, which you can also run in the Lightning Experience. The behavior is slightly different. I'll also talk about Lightning components, and those Lightning components are those written in code using the Aura framework, either by Salesforce, which is either called a standard or a base component, or a developer custom component written by your own in-house developers or your third-party provider. We'll also talk about Flexipages today. So a Flexipage is a Lightning page within our Lightning application, and it's developed using point and click. Salesforce provides us a whole set of Flexipages out the box, but your admins have the ability to change those. And we're going to see today how I can change those and see how that affects my test automation. And finally, I'll also mention page objects. And page objects is a design pattern for creating reusable mappings. And in Provar, we try and create these for you as much as possible. And when I talk about the Lightning enhancements, I'm talking about where we're making Provar automated to be intelligent and create those locators and those page objects for you automatically for things like Visualforce, custom components, and generic website testing. So what's special about Lightning? Now, with Classic, we had a user interface where we had buttons above each section. They're generally consistent, and we had the concept of custom actions and standard actions as well, which appeared in the Chatter publisher window. This was slightly confusing for some users, not knowing where to go to interact with the page or to complete a micro moment action. Within Lightning and Salesforce Mobile, that's been combined into a single action menu in most cases. There are some differences to that on things like the case object and work order object, but on the whole, that's very much been combined. It's easier for people to use. Classic was desktop first, and what I mean by that is that when you request a page, it's very much formatted and ideally around a sort of 1024 by 768 screen format. If you shrink your screen size down or using a Surface tablet, it didn't respond very well to that. It wasn't designed to be responsive. In Lightning, because it was actually mobile first, this Salesforce One app was the first Aura or Lightning application. It's always been designed to be responsive, so it works much better with in terms of larger displays and smaller displays, and allows you a lot more flexibility around that. Classic was also what we call a multi-page app. Every interaction was a round trip between your browser and the Salesforce server. So when you click edit to get the edit page, that page was then loaded. You click save, it goes back to the view page. Each of those was a page load. Not very optimized for a mobile experience. Lightning has solved that issue by becoming what's called a single page application. And within that, the whole page loads up front. And when you're moving between various components in that app, you're generally just moving the visibility, hiding and showing areas. So it's much faster user experience and much better for server round trip times. Lightning also uses what's called an event architecture. We're going to see some examples of this today. So within Lightning, I have various discrete components, and they can basically talk to each other. So one component can send a notification. That could be a notification to save a record or to display an error message. And another component can listen to that and choose to act on it, whether that's to display the error message or to display the updated value after the save is completed. Classic was very much a fixed page design. Our admins could move columns around, add new fields, they could have 1 or 2 columns, but it was fairly standard in the way every page looked. Within Lightning, there's much more flexibility. So the term Flexipage, because the page can be moved around in different ways. It's possible within Lightning to have every single one of your tabs have a completely different layout if you wanted to, with related lists, either in a side component or under the main details. I wouldn't personally recommend that from a user training point of view, but it's certainly possible, and we need to make sure we can handle that. Salesforce have also taken the opportunity to improve the user journey in a number of areas. So there's additional functionality available in Lightning to make it much easier for users. Within Classic, quite often users ended up opening multiple tabs so they could create a record in the background that they needed later on within their user journey. Lightning has thought about that, and it's much easier now for users to add new records without having to open additional tabs. Just looking at some of those features in a little bit more detail. So on the left here, we see a related list in Classic. We see that we have various columns and rows. We see we have some controls to edit or close cases, for example, and that's variable by the type of object. And we also have a new button on some of these sections or other actions we can take. In Lightning, this has been compacted into a much more concise layout so that I can have action menu buttons here, which will show me all the different interactions I can have. And also the values that can be displayed either in a columnar list like they were in Classic, or as what we call a card in a tile format. Now, the good news is if you have tests that work already with the related lists in Classic, when you move to Lightning, those Provar tests will keep on running. Similarly, with layouts in Classic were very much you interacted with an edit or a new button, it pulled open the page, but I can easily navigate away into other areas of the application. Within Lightning, it's much more modal in that I get this overlay window appear. I interact with that and then either cancel, save anew, or save. The buttons are actually the same across both of those. And the layout itself is controlled from the admin, the same layout page. So we actually got the same fields in both of those for the same user, for the same record type. Again, if you've created your tests already in Provar Classic, when you move to Lightning, they will work seamlessly on the Lightning version of that page. Now, controversially in Classic, we had the concept of a lookup. I know personally this used to cause great frustration with new users to Salesforce in understanding why they couldn't see a record that their colleague had just created. So they had to learn how to use the wildcard search, and the facility for that was this very powerful but not necessarily easy to use lookup window. Within Lightning, Salesforce have replaced that, or enhanced that, should I say, with a drop-down pick list that puts search results as you type. So we can test using that now. But if we want to test using the old lookup window, again, that is still supported in Lightning. And if I write a test that uses the old classic lookup that interacts with this screen on the left, it will still run within Provar. Now onto some of the more technical issues. So within Salesforce, there's been this ID, Salesforce field IDs. Now, if you've ever clicked developer tools in Chrome and had a look at what the HTML looks like, you might have seen the opportunity name appear as op3 and something else op4, op4, op5, op6. And at least those were standard for every single org. But as soon as you had a custom ID, these were unique IDs that were generated based on the sandbox you were on, and there was no guarantee when you moved your deployment forward to another sandbox that those IDs would be the same. The good news is that Provar's always been bound to metadata instead, so we've never used these IDs in terms of binding to the page. We've always used the actual API names like opportunity name instead. In Lightning, the problem's actually become more difficult for anyone not using Provar, in that the IDs are at least a little bit more consistent. But I personally couldn't tell you what a 4307466 semicolon A is. Again, good news is Provar works it out for us. We always had a USP around Visualforce and the J_ID fields that are generated if a developer hasn't specified an ID on an individual field. That's still solved by Provar binding to the Apex input field value. So we bind to the variable that the developer is using within their Visualforce page. And within Lightning, the Visualforce has been embedded in an iframe, which again could catch you out if you have a custom framework you're using for automated testing. The good news is Provar again has taken care of that for you. We know about the iframe, we look for it, and we're still able to find that Visualforce page in Lightning Experience. Now, there are some things that have changed that you do need to be aware of, that you do need to change within your tests. So firstly, layout navigation. Now there are multiple subtabs and multiple sections per page, depending how your admin locates related lists or other records or chatter windows, you may need to change your test. Error messages in Lightning also no longer appear with the word error on the front. So you need to make sure that your test is, if it's got to work both Classic and Lightning, that you're using some of the Provar functions, such as contains or ends with, to do that check if you want to make your test running both Classic and Lightning in a cert statement. In a similar way, within Lightning, they've now added percentage symbols and currency symbols to these field inputs that were previously only showing numeric values. So again, if you're asserting a numeric value against 2000 that will work in Classic, it won't work in Lightning. So we recommend you use things like the number format function to either convert both to a string or convert both to a number. There are also changes in user journeys that you need to be aware of. So for related objects, if I'm on a, say, opportunity page and I click new contact role, in the past that would have left me on the new contact role page afterwards, so the new contact. In Lightning, you now, because that's a modal overlay window, you stay where you were. So the user navigation has changed around that, and that might mean you've got obsolete or additional steps you need to add to your test case. Similarly, certain other aspects like campaigns, there's new ways when you're adding a campaign member that makes it much easier for the user, and you want to make sure you're testing that new user experience. So let's start seeing actual demos now. I've already prepared some demos in advance just for speed of time today. For those of you new to Provar, what I have on the right here is Test Builder, which is already up and running. And first, I'm going to run this test through in Classic to just let it see it complete. So I'm just going to play that one. This test is for a lead conversion process. So it's going to navigate through Classic. It's going to create a new lead for Bob Smith. We've assigned a unique ID to that company name for Bob Smith within a Provar function, and I'm navigating to the today's leads list view. I'm going to select that lead and I'm going to press the convert button. And on that convert, I'm going to leave all the defaults in this case. I'm just going to pause here a second. What I've also got here is a API test step. So I've made a SOQL query within my Provar desktop to pull back from that lead the converted account ID and converted contact ID and make sure I can navigate to that record. And then finally, I've got an assert step that's just checking the account name here is the one that I entered that was auto-generated for me in a variable in Provar. So that all works fine. Let's switch this over now. So what I'm showing you now is Provar Desktop. So this is a drag and drop interface where I can build up my tests. I can also build up a description. I can interact with things that aren't Salesforce necessary, such as a SQL database, email service, web service, lots and lots of different functions. And you can even have develop your own APIs to go into this library. All I'm going to do here for today is I'm going to change my test environment from Classic to Lightning. Now, this isn't a feature that comes out the box. You can set this up yourself. And if you go onto the Provar website, we've got a great tutorial on Quick Start Lightning, where it talks you through how you set up your test environment so I can run tests in both. I'll very quickly cover what this test environment is changing for me. Over here in my test settings, I've got a connection for Salesforce. In that connection, normally we have this enable Lightning mode, which tells us to switch Lightning on or off. And over here, I've got two overrides, one when the environment's set to Lightning, where Lightning mode is on, and one when it's set to Classic, where it's switched off. I've also got a variable I'm using, which I'm setting at the same time. And that variable I can use within my tests with conditional statements, such as an if clause, so I can have the same test run for both Lightning and Classic. So I could take the test I've got here, I can add additional steps if I wanted to test new functionality that's in Lightning that doesn't appear in Classic. So let's see that second test underway. We'll move over to my next session. So just in Provar, you can have multiple test sessions open at once, which I've taken advantage of today, so all my connections are ready to go. So it's exactly the same test that we saw before. I'm just going to run that again. There's no conditional statements here. It's going to pause in the same place, but the user experience is slightly different. You'll also see here that this time I'm running in Lightning, but this won't look like your Lightning. I've taken advantage of the Spring 18 new theming, and it has no impact on Provar. So we've made it all Provar branded with our blues and pinks. Advise you to do the same on your own orgs. End users love this kind of thing. But the test runs the same way as we did in Classic. So we're now going through the process. We've created our new lead. We're now going through the list view, working in exactly the same way. And we're now going to click the convert button, which is moved now to the top right. You've seen that concise action menu section. We've got the new Lightning convert lead screen, which again I've assumed as the defaults. And this is a new page. So we don't have this in Classic. So this is a great piece of a new user journey Salesforce have added that make it easier for the end user to either choose, do I want to see the opportunity, do I want to see the account, or do I want to see the contact? Because this test runs for both, I haven't taken advantage of this. This is typically where I might want to add new functionality. I'll just carry on the test. Just go back to the account view, and I have my cert step, works exactly the same. Okay, quick recap. So what we just saw, I reused the Classic test for a new lead conversion to Lightning, and there was no changes required to my Provar test, but I probably do want to make some changes because I want to enhance the test to test more. We've seen tests that work in both Classic and Lightning, using that environment variable to control them. The other thing actually I haven't shown you, which I want to do, is a new test for a Lightning console. So let's move on to that example. So here I'm in the service console in Lightning. I've already started a new case off just for speed of use. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one of the searches on the contact name by just typing in and matching to Tom Roberts. So I've already done that on the account matched to Smithco, and this time what I'm going to do is use the lookup functionality of Provar. So if I had this lookup working in Classic, it would work the same in Lightning, but I can also map it myself here. So we've gone into the lookup page. I'm going to select the row for Tom Roberts. So I've just on pause there. And we click that link, and then we go back. And what I want to do is just add some more steps onto this. So what I want to do here is I'm going to map the case origin. So I'm going to say this is a phone call. So I can just select that value and add it to the test case, or I could have typed the value in on the right-hand side here. So we see we're in Test Builder. It's located in the page scaffold. It's a console application. It knows we're working with the current tab, not a sub tab. And it knows that this is actually the case Salesforce layout. It knows the field I've selected, or I could change it to a different one if I wanted. And it knows the value I've selected, or again, I could change it to a different value. So I can add that to my test, and it adds it back into my Provar desktop tool. And I can keep going, adding each of those fields as I've done the mandatory ones. I'm just going to put a subject in, need to reboot the phone after software update. Something I think we've all faced before. Again, plain text, I can add that in. It doesn't have to be a pick list. Equally, I could use any of the other functions of Provar to assert values, to click, hover menus, right click, double clicks, so on and so forth, drag and drop. And finally, I'm going to interact with that save button. So you can see how Test Builder makes it very easy to create tests, and you can also, as I say, do them from within our Eclipse desktop as well. Personally, I'm a fan of the Test Builder. There we go. So that was creating a console application, a console test using Test Builder. What's key there is for standard pages, you don't need to author special Lightning tests. The test that we author on a standard layout will work the same across Classic and Lightning. One other note, it's a good idea to leave your test user always in Classic mode. Once you use the switch to Lightning experience on your test user, then Salesforce always redirects your Classic request to Lightning. Let Provar take care of that switch over between Classic and Lightning using the checkbox, the connection parameter, or the environment variable that I just showed. So a little bit more exciting now, let's look at testing Flexipages. So what we have here is an account page, and it's already been modified. You can see I've got some custom text here. I've already moved some things around as well. And we're going to see, I'm going to run a test on this page. I'm then going to be extremely brave. I'm going to go into the Lightning App Builder as an admin would. And as they can actually do in live and production, they don't even have to wait to do it through a deployment, even though they should. And I'm going to make some changes to that page. I'm going to add some extra tabs and change the way related lists appear and see if my test case still works. So wish me luck on this one. Okay, let's just start that off. So first I'm going to run this through once without changes. So we'll see it's going to go to the account page. On that account page, I'm going to find the related lists, and on that opportunity related list, I want to find my opportunity with a name including Demo 3. There we go, Smith Co Inc. Demo 3. It's going to click that. So this is kicking off, ultimately, this is the start of my test that's actually about testing the opportunity. But in theory, if I make too many changes to the account page, I could break this very valuable and important test to me, knowing that my opportunity triggers or workflows or processes are working. I could break that by making a change to something that seems unrelated, such as the account page. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a Provar feature that we call step 2. So I've jumped back, I've rewound the clock by about 30 seconds if you like, and I'm going to redo this test. But before I do that test, I'm going to go into the account name and make those changes. I'm going to go up to the setup here, and I'm going to edit this page. So as I've got a poor memory, I like to leave myself little notes to remind myself what I'm going to do. So I'm going to add some extra tabs here. So the first one is going to be called Opportunity Analysis. And the second one I'm going to call Parent Account. And on that opportunity analysis, let's pull in a report chart. And that report chart, I'm happy with that report, but I want to only see records for this account. So it's faceted to the account record I'm on. On the parent account, similarly, I'm going to pull in a related record. So each of these, when I say a standard or base component or Flexipage component, that's this library here under standard, these 24 items that Salesforce provide for us. When I talk about custom components, these are ones that I've written that we're also going to see some of today. So I've moved those things around. I've got that in there. That's all great. Let's just be a bit more challenging. I'm going to move this related list. I'm going to try and full Provar and move it there. And let's also switch it. So currently it's in the tile view. So I see these different cards. I'm going to switch that to a list. So now for my users, I've decided this looks more like classic, so they're going to find it more familiar. And all these changes are things that you're probably going to do when you move to Lightning. These are very common things that we see people do. Just going to have to save that and go back. So we see those changes. I've got my analysis, I've got my parent account, it's all there. And then let's continue our test. Let's see what happens when I run this time. Have we fooled Provar? So here we go, it's looking for the opportunity related list. It finds it, that's good news. Is it going to find it in the demo 3 in the list instead of being in the card? Yes, it is. So that's a great example of some minor changes I've made to the page, but it doesn't break my test automation. I'm just going to leave that to run and carry on talking. So we saw the Flexipage after the admin updates the page. We've seen that Provar is immune to some changes to tab ordering and additions, but there are limitations when you move components on a page. So if I'd moved the related list from being in the main section to being in the right-hand narrow bar, you would need to actually refresh your Provar metadata and potentially remap the step for any complex changes. Quite often you just need to refresh your Provar metadata and then we'll find it in its new position though. So now I want to talk about testing custom line components. So these are ones that your developers have written. So typically they're written in the Aura language, and as an example here, this is an example that's come straight from the Salesforce Trailhead module on writing Lightning components. And it's just going to give us a component where we create a new contact within the page. Very, very simple indeed. Now, there are some challenges when you're testing custom components. The first one is Lightning isn't one for one, so it isn't the same mapping to Classic. What I mean by that is that the way custom components are written in Lightning is quite different to the way we write Visualforce pages and components in Classic. So it's a different way of handling things, so we can't locate things in the same way. In addition, the Salesforce Aura framework has been a moving target for the last 4 years now when it was first used in Salesforce 1, and it was open sourced as a project that people could contribute to. So we've seen a number of components and ways of doing things change dramatically, such as the way error messages are displayed, and a number of things have been deprecated over that time. The Lightning design system, and what I mean by Lightning design system is the look and feel of Salesforce Lightning. So the fact that we have things like paths, the fact we have buttons in a menu bar, the way tabs appear with drop downs, the styling and of things like inline edit, all those aspects are what's called the Lightning design system, so that when developers build their own Lightning components, we try and make them look the same as the standard Salesforce. So for users, they're not getting this jarring sensation of things that look very different. So that also has evolved over the last 2 years or so. So we've seen very much in Spring 18 a huge change in the new themes that I pointed out earlier, where you're able to rebrand things and how that affects your HTML and CSS. There's also, Lightning is quite unusual in that the HTML markup and the CSS that's generated by Salesforce, it does vary by component usage. So if I take my list view and I move it into a right-hand narrow component, the divs and the wrappers around that and the CSS that's invoked, the classes that are used is different depending on its position on the page. So we need to be aware of that and protect it against those sort of changes. And we have custom components are unlike Visualforce Apex components in that they don't enforce any unit testing on the developer. So with Apex, your developers were forced to do at least 75% average code coverage on their unit tests before pushing them through into a unit test or across another sandbox. Within Lightning components, there's no mandatory level of code coverage. So the quality and the maturity of components that are currently being developed isn't quite where it should be, which only makes it even more important that our testing is robust. And I've got some deliberate examples of that today, and they are components that I've downloaded that other people have written. The good news is Provar can help us with those first 4 points. So we're going to continue to take care of those first 4 as changes are introduced within the Salesforce releases, the 3 releases per year, or by a patch. We'll take care of any changes with that or changes in metadata or any of the other things that we handle today. Unfortunately, the last 2 items we can't fix for you as much as I'd like to. So you need to make sure that your project team are using a robust set of development standards, or looking at things like the Lightning testing service to have a quality level that they should have in terms of the deliveries they push into system test or UAT. So let's see a demo of one of those components. So this simple custom form for creating a new contact. So within this example here, I'm just going to push through onto the account home screen. I'm going to pick one of those recent records. And once the view screen loads, I'm going to show you that we've got a new Lightning component on the page. Okay, I'm just going to pause it there. So what I want to show here is I've got an interaction. I just did an inline edit, okay, on the account name, and I'm changing the number of employees. This is all fairly standard. We've always been able to do this. But I've also got a second form open, which is quite unusual. If you were using Classic before, we wouldn't normally have a confusion of two forms open at once. And the business case for this, if someone's producing a lot of edits on a form, be it an opportunity, a case, or an account, but someone calls and they need to record a new contact, we just try to make it easy for them to add that new contact, but without stopping what they were working on and without having to use something like Console to do this. So I'm going to let that just step through again, and we're going to then start adding items to the component on the right here. So over here, what we're going to do is I've added some new steps to this test case. So this is within that Lightning component. I'm going to add a first name. Now, what we see firstly is there's a different page structure. This is an SF Flexi component, okay, not a page object as such. And it's, because I've already mapped it, it's found the existing page object I've created, which unfortunately I called it Lightning Page rather than New Contact, but that was just that's my bad naming standard. And it's found that I've seen this, I've got this field, I've mapped it before, but let's pretend I haven't mapped it before. I change that to new field, and it gives me this new by aura. So this is a new field locator we've just added. So in the by aura, as we do with the Visualforce locator, we're binding to the variable attribute that the developer has used. And that's more robust than using something like the name or the XPath, because there's nothing to stop my developer having 5 fields on this component, all called first name if they wanted to. They're very unlikely to do that with the variable attribute. There wouldn't be much point in asking the same question and seeing all 5 fields update them at once. And as I could before, I can set a value, I can interact with that in various ways, I can assert the value, all of those same controls are available. I'm just going to let this continue. So I'm setting a name, title, phone number, and just going to pause there. So on the phone number, we see here, we've got a validation message. So again, what we need to be able to do is assert that message. It looks identical to one I might have over here from a validation rule coming back from the server. So what I want to make sure is that I can assert values like that as well. I'm just going to let this continue. We're going to go back to the account page. It's going to complete a save on there, and then it's going to try completing a save on the new contact page. So it's going to change the number of employees to 8,000, and it's going to save that account. That account's now closed. It hasn't closed. I'll create new contact. I'm going to fix my phone number now and click save on the right here. This is another important aspect. So has this save worked or not? I need to be checking that this save has completed. So in my test case, I should write an API step now, and I should look up to see if a new contact's been created with these details, or maybe if I choose the emails unique with JSmith at Provar Testing, and that would make my test more complete. The reason for doing that is when developers write components in Visualforce, they have this concept of an apex page messages that will display any error messages back from the server. Within Lightning, they don't have that luxury today. So they have to handle their error messages and remember to look for error messages themselves. So it's just a bit of a gotcha if your people are writing Lightning components. So we saw I had an inline edit in Lightning, which is exactly the same as Classic. I tested a custom Lightning component, and that was actually within a Flexipage as well, and the new Aura by locator. And I was interacting with multiple forms in parallel there. There's no problem moving across. Provar wasn't confused by a first name or a name field across different areas of the screen. It understands them independently. And we also talked briefly about the custom components fading silently. I now want to do a more complex demonstration. So this is a master detail component, so our penultimate demo of the day. So within here, I've got a new tab, edit products. I'm displaying within this new custom Lightning component, I've got a account name, I've got the opportunity field, stage probability, and a total amount. And I've actually got 3 Lightning components. So within this outer Lightning component, I have a table as a component. And that table consists of an iteration of 3 line items. So let's see how we test that one. So I'm just going to navigate onto my opportunity. And I'll just pause this in a second and show you some of how that component's working before we continue. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is I've got an API query that's going to pull the amount back from Salesforce first. So I want to know what was the value before this page loaded. And I could then assert, make sure the same value is displayed on the page. So I could on this field, I could take that field, I could add to my test case and assert if I wanted to. Within this structure, it's identified again a flexi component. It understands which flexi component it is. It's seen that's an existing field, or again, I could say it's a new field and do my own locator for it if I wanted to. This component is using a Lightning event, and it's using that event to show any changes that are happening. So if I change the quantity, watch the total price change without me leaving the field. So it's happening kind of on change. I'm seeing changes to that value. Equally, if I add another product to this, a floating license, let's put 1 in, it's updated dynamically. Okay, and if I remove that, save it, again, the price keeps updating dynamically. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a change to the quantity of 4. It's going to locate that within the second row of the table. I guess I should have done it on the name of the product instead, but anyway, that's the test I've written. So we'll change that quantity to 4, and we're going to see that value change in real time. And when that value has changed, I'm going to basically capture that value and compare it to the value we started with, less $9,000. And there we are, that's completed and worked the test. So we've just seen adding opportunities and line items, populating and asserting values in nested custom components, which was quite challenging, but it's there now, we can do that. And testing those components in a iterated table. And we've made that as simple as possible for you, is just right-clicking, add into test case. My final demo is about using Lightning in Visualforce. Now, you might not yet be planning to move your users or your customers across to Lightning, but that doesn't stop you developing Lightning components and running them either in Classic or on the Salesforce mobile application. So very quickly, because we are short on time, I'm here back in Classic. I've used the left-hand nav bar to insert that same create contact component. And I can run through that in exactly the same way. And it's exactly the same validation messages. And I can assert values in the same way that I did previously. So I can add this to my test case to complete the title. And we see we've got the account new screen. It's identified the Visualforce page. Remember that I said earlier that wraps around the Lightning component, and it's found the Lightning component, which I called new contact in this case. We also have our Aura by locator here, which has found it by title. Okay, we've got a couple more minutes. So Salesforce Provar roadmap. So we currently support lots and lots of features in Lightning. We make it transparent for you to move over from Classic for interaction with records and related lists and list views and buttons, etc. in console. And you can even reuse your Visualforce page objects that you've created in Classic as well. Now, we test some Flexipage components. We don't support all 24 yet. And when I say support, I mean in terms of we don't automate the Aura by locators for you. So those that we don't support currently, you have to do that XPath location yourself. We don't do it for you, but we're planning to add it. And also, we've got some custom Lightning component support, as you've seen demonstrated today that's coming in our 1.9 release. Obviously, there's no change in Lightning to any API tests, so all your API tests will run identical whether you're using Lightning or Classic. In terms of the next 6 months, we're increasing the amount of those Flexipage, those standard components we're supporting, to include things like path and utility bar and custom actions. And we're also adding more support for those custom components that you can develop. And through the latter half of the year, we'll be adding additional support for more of those custom components based on the feedback that our customers and our future customers give to us about what they want to see in the platform. We don't expect to be working on Lightning components next year, except to support new components as Salesforce release them in their 3 annual releases. So we're currently working on things like the new URL format, the change from one app to Lightning that's coming in the summer release, some special actions that aren't available in Classic that are available in Lightning, and when you create your own custom global actions and local actions, again, supporting those within Provar to make it easier to locate them. Things like tab drop-down menus and pinning tabs, path, highlight panels, utility bars, macros. We already support communities, but within Lightning, there's also this concept of a Lightning bolt where someone can pre-build a set of templates for you for your community. So again, areas like that we're looking at, and additional support around the custom components from Salesforce for their namespace, UI, and Lightning components. We've also got interesting news on our on-device mobile app testing, which I hope we'll demo in our March webinar, so do sign up for that. Hetty, do we have time for the Lightning migration strategy, or do we need to go to questions?
I think we just about have time for the migration strategy, and it will give everyone a chance to start typing out their questions into the questions box as well. So fire away.
Okay. So when it comes to your Lightning test strategy, there's a number of considerations you need to make. So the first one is the project planning any major functionality challenges. So it's quite difficult in my experience to get a budget on the basis of I want to change the UI. So very few CIOs are going to put their hand in their pocket because you want to move to a sexier user interface. So there's probably another reason you're probably going to introduce some new functionality. So consider what that is as part of your test strategy. Because it needs to be tested clearly. Also consider whether the project team are planning to replace Visualforce pages with Lightning components, or whether they're going to take their existing Visualforce pages and just restyle them with the Lightning style sheets. If they do the latter, then any of your Visualforce tests will actually keep working. We don't care about the CSS, we don't care about how it's rendered within Provar. And also consider, are your users all going to go to Lightning in one go, or are some of them going to run on Classic? Now, depending on the answers to those questions, you're going to come up with one of 3 options. So you're going to either have a single test suite that runs both Classic and Lightning tests with maybe some conditional steps in them. You're going to have separate tests for Classic and Lightning, with the idea being when all your users move to Lightning, you'll retire all your Classic test scripts, so you won't have that legacy to maintain. And you may decide, actually, I'm going to start from scratch. Whatever I had before, I'm going to create a new set of scripts just for Lightning. We're going big bang. We're going to do it all in one. In terms of Lightning migration strategy, there's some very good articles on the Salesforce Trailhead modules on this, which will take you through how to go through a process of planning your Lightning migration. As part of that, it will generate to you, or tell you to click on a link within your org to generate a Lightning readiness report. And this is something you can use, and it will give you some estimated times, a Lightning effort score if you like. Unfortunately, they only look at the impact of, say, rewriting a custom JavaScript into Lightning, and not actually any effort for testing that those changes have been made or changing existing tests that you have. So it's worth running your existing tests if you're a Provar customer in Lightning mode and using that to contribute toward the project team's Lightning effort score of how much effort it will be to move over. Now, the majority of tests used in standard configuration should already pass, but you'll also find some functionality that's passed will also be re-implemented by your Salesforce admins and devs because they want to use new areas of Lightning that wasn't available in Classic. You'll find some of those tests will need to be updated because there's new user journeys, like we saw with the lead object there. When I do a lead convert, there's 3 new paths I can take at the end of that test case that weren't available to me before. And some tests will fail because they're not visible in Lightning yet. So some features of Classic aren't yet available in Lightning. There's very few now. It's much more the other way around. There's features in Lightning that aren't available in Classic. So while you're going through the migration process, don't forget to run your tests in both environments daily, because as you update your test work for Lightning, if you want it to run in Classic still, obviously you need to be running regression in both environments. Some further reading as well. If you go onto the Salesforce Trailhead, there's an excellent module that takes you into Lightning Experience in a way that I've not had time to do today, that will walk through how things like the global search works, how the navigation works, and all the differences from Classic. I recommend using that as a source material when you're migrating your use over to Lightning. We also have a Provar tutorial on testing Lightning, where things such as setting up the environment variable I showed briefly today, how you use statements, functions in Provar such as contains and ends with to make your error testing robust are in there as well, and a number of other excellent examples. There's also a very useful guide on the Salesforce documentation around Classic versus Lightning feature comparison. So you can take an evaluation both of features in Classic that may not be available in Lightning, where you won't be able to test them, but more to the point, new features in Lightning that you've never had test cases for before. And hopefully next week or so, we're hoping to launch our white paper on testing custom Lightning components. So the last 3 demonstrations I did today around Lightning and Visualforce, the master detail Lightning component, and the simple contact form, we've got a couple more examples for that, and we've got a white paper that walks you through how we tested that, the source code for those components, and we'll make that all available, and we'll announce that in the next week or so.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. We'd love to hear your feedback on this webinar, so please do share your thoughts. I'll be including a short survey tomorrow when I send you the webinar recording as well, and we'd love to hear what you think about it. So if we don't have any more questions, then we'll end the session here. Thank you again to Richard for presenting, and thanks to everybody for coming along. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.